Hello, and welcome everyone to the first webinar of our series about AI in modern work. In this series, we're going to discuss what AI tools are coming into the modern workplace, such as M365 Copilot or even OpenAI and Llama services on Microsoft Azure, and tools like Bing Chat for Enterprise. We will discuss how do we prepare our environments to enable them, how do we establish governance on our data and apply security on top to make sure those tools gain trust and adoption among the employees. We're going to look at how do we turn these tools on, learn together how to use them, and get most out of this tool set. We're also going to see how can we extend those AI tools and capabilities to make them work for your organization specifically. And of course, we will have a good look into adoption and change practices to tackle those learning curve and look into things like prompt engineering and many more. Okay, great. I think let's kick it off. So today, since we have the very first episode, we're going to take a look into M365 Copilot specifically, and how do we get ready to enable this. This episode is going to be hosted by myself, Anton, and my colleague David. We both work for WM Reply, and our specialism is building and enabling solutions within Microsoft 365 ecosystem. Just a reminder that we will have Q&A enabled, so remember to drop your questions if you have any as long as we go into the chat, and we will come back to them at the end of the session. So let's take a look into what are we going to cover today. So first of all, we're going to go through a very quick reminder what Microsoft 365 Copilot is. Then we're going to take a look into the prerequisites for organizations to enable Copilot. We're going to take a look at the question on how to actually tackle this value for the organization of enabling Copilot. We're going to do a little bit of deep dive into the technical readiness aspect. And then we're going to talk about change and adoption, go through Q&A, and then we're going to come back to probably the most important bit is actionable next steps, like how do I start? Okay, great. So first of all, let's take a look and remind ourselves what M365 Copilot is. I bet most of you are already familiar with the topic, but just a quick refresh for those who are not. So M365 Copilot is a productivity tool which is being announced by Microsoft into all of its applications. And as a user, you can think about it pretty much as about ChatGPT working within your organization and being able to work with your company data specifically without risk of oversharing and enhancing this training set from just information over the internet to information which is specific to your organization. And on top of this, as you can see on the video, it has a pretty cool execution layer, which is capable of creating tangible output, like documents, presentations, or even scheduling meetings. So again, comparing it to ChatGPT, it's not just spitting out the text output, but it's actually creating something tangible in your M365 environment. And actually, Copilot is kind of an umbrella term because it will have different capabilities in different applications. Like, for example, in Excel, it will be able to create spreadsheets and analyze data, and in Power Automate, it will be able to modify your flow using your prompts in natural language. So that's a very quick overview of what Copilot is, and it's dubbed as the probably the most impactful productivity tool which is being announced recently. So let's take a look into how this is made possible. So first of all, you will see that the Copilot engine is relying on GPT large language model to make decisions and summarize text. But it's also using your data retrieved via Graph API to connect documents that you have access to. And it's using semantic search to actually get understanding of the data you have in the environment. So why is it doing this? It's called grounding. It's basically taking your prompt like, oh, can you summarize the state of Project Unicorn into a 3-slide deck, to actually searching for files related to Project Unicorn, and then execute the summary of these documents, and then use Graph API to create a command to PowerPoint to create the deck for you. And to make the summarization possible, as I said, these documents have to be indexed using search. And if you're familiar with search in M365, it's using the permissions which your current user has, right? So it's not using elevated privileges. It's only being able to search for the documents that you should be able to see in your M365 environment. And that's a very important statement. We'll go back to this in a couple of minutes. But first of all, let's take a look into the prerequisites and just discuss them one by one, like how actually what is required, just mandatory to have in my environment to enable Copilot features. So first of all, I think, I think it's kind of obvious, but if you'd like to use Copilot in Excel and Word and PowerPoint, you should have those applications enabled and deployed to your organization. So then your employees can actually use Copilot in Excel. One of the requirements is Azure AD, which has been renamed to Entra accounts for all of the users, which I think is coming for granted now if you're in M365 environment, because every user is backed with Azure AD account. OneDrive enabled for users is actually required as well, because some of the scenarios in the M365 Copilot, like restoring documents and something else, they require access to OneDrive. So to get more from out of the Copilot, your OneDrive should be enabled for users. So the OneDrive will work in a new Outlook for Teams. So if you're using this desktop client, you probably notice this toggle at the top right, switch to new Outlook. So that's going to be a prerequisite to use Copilot in Outlook. At the very beginning, it should work in Teams desktop client. And if you would like to use Copilot in Microsoft Loop, it should be enabled as well. So if you haven't seen or you haven't tried the Loop in preview, I recommend trying this, because that's an amazing tool which allows the simultaneous collaboration documents. Semantic index should be enabled. So that's the AI and machine learning variation of the search index, where it's not just indexing text, but it's also trying to build those relationship between the models, between the documents. So if you have a financial report, when the semantic index is built, the index is understanding that this is a financial document. It's actually reporting on your company performance for the last maybe 6 months. Then all the users should be enabled for current channel or the monthly enterprise channel for M365 apps to have access to Copilot. Another thing which is not common as a prerequisite, but as a strong recommendation, is that the network should be aligned with M365 connectivity principles, because some of the functionality in Copilot will rely on the WebSockets. So to minimize the latency, the network should be configured as is described in M365 block. And then going forward, I think that's not the immediate thing, but since Copilot will have this capability of being extended with plugins, the plugins should be enabled. Copilot plugins should be enabled in Teams Admin Center. There is a QR code on this slide, so it's leading to Microsoft blog, which describes those things in details, and the Microsoft Mechanics video talking about this prerequisites, and they're showing some screenshots of functionality which is currently in preview. Okay, great. So, and let's talk about licensing. So last week, Microsoft released pricing for the tool and some prerequisites. So first of all, if you're an enterprise customer, you should be on M365 E3 or E5 to enable Copilot. Then if you are a small or medium business, you should be on Business Standard or Business Premium. And then, of course, on top of this, the pricing which has been released last month it's about like $30 per user per month, which is not a small amount, but it is actually very, very close to the cost of ChatGPT Plus. But still, for the big companies, it can result in not an insignificant amount of money being spent if you just kind of enable this for everyone in one go. So therefore, as part of our engagement with our customers, the very first step we're doing is a discovery with the stakeholders to make sure that together we can understand what are the objectives of enabling Copilot, who should be the target audience, and who will benefit the most. What are the areas of the business which can see the biggest productivity growth, and how do we measure return on investment? So basically, at the very beginning, even before we started any technical readiness, we were helping to build a business case to enable Copilot organization-wide. And I'm not saying like everyone in our organization, so we should define those user groups which should be enabled. And in parallel to this activity, which is like effectively planning and discovery, we will be looking into the current state of the environment. And we'll be starting from the most crucial aspect, which is permissions to data and oversharing. So how do we ensure that each employee can access only files they're supposed to access? There are multiple tools which can give this result, and the right tool depends on the organization size and on the level of maturity on this like data governance journey. So this picture, remember, basically just a reminder. So what's important here is that this M365 Copilot it's relying on Microsoft Graph to get access to the data that you have access to when you type in the prompt. So as I said, the very first step will be the assessment of the environment. So now let's take a look into the tools which are available to actually assess your environment. Let me switch to my demo environment, and I hope everything's going to go smooth. So from the very beginning, we can go into the SharePoint Admin Center. And the very first place where you can go as an administrator, you can go into the list of your active sites. So here, what you can see is list of your sites. If there is a team site and it has private channels, you will see the channel sites here. But what you can effectively do, you can click on each site, you can check the membership of each site and see who are the owners, who are the members, like people who have effective permissions to the site. And then for each site, you can see the settings, whether the site is public or private, whether the sensitivity label is applied, and whether external file sharing is enabled or not. You can also see the aggregated view from this table. You can see columns like sensitivity and external sharing, which have been available here in this list. So the very first thing you can do is just go in the list of active sites and have this reporting almost on what sites do you have and who has access to which sites. But I mean, for the demo environment, it's very easy to say, right? But if you are in the production environment for many, many years, there will be a lot of sites and you will need to have something more robust, something which is aggregated. So therefore, there is another tool which is available, which is called Syntax SharePoint Advanced Management, which, among others, it provides a very good set of functionality to ensure and secure access, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. But one of the features here is the reports on data access governance, where you can see the sharing links created in your environment, and you can run reports and you can see the sharing links created for each site, like how many links has been created and who are the primary admin and the site sensitivity. So you can use this reporting, which you can download as an Excel, as a starting point for your investigation too. And then you can use the third-party solutions, which provides this level of reporting. Like one of them is ShareGate, which is providing you a report on on the active sides and on the permissions across the sides. Another tool that we are using is the WM Access Analytical Tool Report, which is essentially a set of comprehensive scripts running behind the scenes with a Power BI reporting on top of this. So it has like different angles of how you can take a look into your permission structure on your SharePoint and OneDrive environment. So you can start from a sites perspective, which is pretty much the same thing that you've seen on the out-of-the-box active sites. It has some stats, and you can take a look into the site and go into details of each site and see which users has direct access to the site, what are the role providers. You can see which groups has access to the site, whether being added directly or through other groups. You can see the director roles access and then sharing links access to this site as well. But then another kind of perspective how you can assess your environment using this tool is going from a user perspective. So say you have your Adele, and you see that Adele has access to 44 sites. So you can open user details and see, okay, on which sites Adele has a direct access. Say if it's sales and marketing, you can click here and you can see that on sales and marketing, Adele has direct access, the contribute access, and also she's been added into the marketing members and owners. And you can also see on which sites Adele has access through the membership of specific groups. So you can see the groups here. Say the design group is given Adele access to the design side. And then another one is taking a look into your permission structure through the groups, like what are the groups which has access. And one of the interesting feature for me would be to see the very specific groups, like everyone except external users, like when you're normally sharing something and you're just doing this like blindly, if no policies are enabled or technical limitations are there, you can just share this with everyone except external users. You're just sharing this within your organization, which is good. You're not sharing this externally, but at the same time, when we're talking about oversharing and data being accessed via search, by Copilot, that's probably something that you may want to tackle as well. So you can see that everyone except external users has access to quite a few sites. Some of them are SharePoint sites, some of them are OneDrive sites, and you would like to start from this report to actually do very first steps of limiting oversharing in your SharePoint and OneDrive environment. So let's imagine that we have done the assessment of the environment. We have the build report, which is showing, okay, where those permissions issues are. And then probably as a next step, we would like to make sure that after all the remediations, we build a proper roadmap of actions and recommendations for your company to make sure that going forward, the environment still stays in the compliance, right? So we fixed everything today, but how can we make sure that in the year, the environment is still compliant, the data is still governed? And here we can use features of Microsoft Purview, which is Compliance Center. It has like few main aspects how to look into data governance. So first of all, on the file level, we want to go into the classifiers. So the trainable classifiers, and there are sensitive information types. So we would like to utilize this feature to let machine learning scan through all the content and identify the specific content which is matching whether specific pattern or it's been matched to regular expression, things like bank statements, for example. So this is the trainable classifiers. Those are actually pre-built, like employee agreement or customer files or financial statements. And then we will be able to use those classifiers and the sensitive information type going further in the data loss prevention and information protection. So things which we have here for sensitive information type are, for example, the credit card number. So the machine learning algorithms can detect and using search, they can detect the credit card number in our documents. So how do we use this going forward, actually? We can, going forward, go into our information protection section and take a look at our labels and actually create a new label. So let's imagine we would like to label documents which has the credit card information in them. So we will go here and we'll create a new label, which is a credit card demo. Just give it a, yeah. So this is going to be just on the file level. So we're not going to talk about the containers or sites. So we're just going to label files which contains the credit card information. There's quite a lot of settings, but what we would like to showcase today is that we will be able to enable auto labeling of those files as soon as the information is detected. Or we can say, as soon as the content contains the sensitive information type, which we specify, and it's going to be the credit card number, we're going to automatically apply the label, or maybe just recommend, we're going to apply the label to the document. We can show custom message. And this is how we create a new label, basically. Then, other than just labeling files and enforcing this labeling, what we can also do, let's create a policy. What we should take a look at is the data loss prevention policies. So again, if with sensitivity labels and information protections, we just label the documents in our environment, with data loss prevention policies, we're gonna enforce policies using the same classifiers which we had and sensitive information type to prevent the information flow from outside the organization or even be shared within the organization to people who should not have permissions to this documentation. So this is regarding the file level, but then if we take a look into the container level, again, what we've shown here on the active sites, from active sites in SharePoint Admin Center, we can take a look into the settings here. So we can limit the privacy from public to private. We can take a look how the external file sharing is configured on your sites. But also when we have the sensitivity labels and we are creating a new SharePoint site, we can specify the sensitivity labels on the container level. So say we have a sensitivity label for the project Obsidian. So we know that we would like to mark all the sites and all the files which related to Project Obsidian with this specific label. So we can enforce the sensitivity label on the container level to make sure that then going forward we can apply those policies, the DLP policies, for example, to those sites as well. And then, as I said, there is a SharePoint syntax advanced management, which if you buy the license for this additional license, which costs about like £2.5 per user per month, you will see the advanced management section in your SharePoint Admin Center. And it has quite a lot of features like restricting access to your SharePoint sites in real time. For example, if you know that there is a SharePoint site which contains sensitive information, it has very complex permission structure. You don't really want to break it now, but you need to immediately restrict access to this specific site so you can actually apply the real-time protection on this site. Just limit this to the very specific group. So if someone outside of this group is trying to access the site and they are not inside this group, they will just see access denied. It's not limited in the files appearing in search results, but as soon as someone clicks on search, they will see access denied if they are not permitted to. There are a few other features in here. In terms of the license for the advanced management, the tool is called the SharePoint Syntax Advanced Management, but you don't need the syntax license for it. So I made this mistake. I bought a license for 50 quid and I was waiting for hours until the advanced features appeared. They didn't. Then I was reading documentation again. And the license you actually need is SharePoint Advanced Management. So this is the tool, this is the license you will have to license all the employees in your organization to make those advanced features available. So that's regarding the roadmap. And then just for kind of a rough idea of how the delivery timeline look for the technical readiness phase. I know it's going to be different for different size of organization, right? It will depend on the size of the organization, its maturity, whether you're doing today with data governance. But the point here is that unless your data governance is already set up and you're pretty sure that the employees cannot access information they shouldn't access to using search, we think that it will take up to 6 weeks to turn on Copilot. It's basically not happening overnight. And at this stage, after this phase, you should be ready to say, okay, so we're going with Copilot for a pilot group of users, or we're not going, we're not ready yet, we have to do more remediation together. But ideally, at this stage, we say, okay, we would like to go with Copilot. And now the most interesting and the most challenging bit is going to happen, which is handling people side of the tool. Well, I'll hand over to David.
Look at that for a perfect segue. Thanks, Anton. So I think what Anton's gone through and shown us there is it's very much around, how do we take what's there and really make sure that our data is secure? We know that Copilot is that internal version of ChatGPT or whatever AI system you might have been, trialing and playing with to date. And now it's obviously about making sure that the data and what we've got is secure to make sure that people access and see what is available to them and what they should be seeing. And as Ant says, now it's all about how do we make stuff happen and introduce a pilot, if you will, on Copilot, although that could become a bit of a tongue twister. So really, this is trying to make sure that once we've got that assessment done, we've got our roadmap and we've handed over those recommendations, that we really start to think about that next phase. Now, some things are quicker and easier to do now. So the fact that you've got Copilot features available in something like the Power Platform means that your citizen developers, your community democratized developers could start using it right away, which is fantastic. And then, maybe in the longer term, thinking about that Copilot Center of Excellence, what does that look like? What is good? How do we start to share that across everyone in the organization? But if we take a step back a little bit here, what do we do first of all? And how do we start to work out getting people, users, our stakeholders, our sponsors using something like Copilot and think about success? So it's almost taking that step back first of all and thinking, right, for us, what are the measures of success for this pilot? What are those prerequisites? What is it that we want to be testing, proving and demonstrating to our stakeholder groups? It could be, did people get more time back? Were people able to run those reports, more quickly than they ever have before? And also just thinking about, who is it that we want to test and be part of this pilot community? And it maybe shouldn't be, just one team, one department, but maybe a few different teams and departments from across the organization, so that there's a bit of a test and a measure against those who didn't have the Copilot license. Were the activities, the jobs, the tasks that they were trying to undertake longer to do? And then once we've kind of got those, we understand those a bit more and we've assigned those licenses, it's then about validating those Copilot capabilities. So did it meet our expectations? You could almost think of this as, did we prove the hypothesis that we were trying to test? And that's all about success, making sure that success is measured and really trying to prove that value of Copilot. Because if this is a pilot and a test that we want to scale, we want to give it to more people across the organization, then we really need to make sure that we're demonstrating that value. We say the same thing about something like Microsoft Viva. Let's test it with a smaller group and community. Did it, meet our expectations? Was it valuable? Was it successful? And then let's start to think about how we roll that out. So now is where we start to, check in with people regularly. We saw from that timeline of what Ant showed us, that was about the technical readiness. At this point, we need to be checking in with people weekly and bringing that community together with the communications that we have with that pilot group. You could use something like Viva Engage, you could use a team, people sharing their experiences, asking questions. And I think as well, to almost take a step back again, you need to think about the types of people, those personas, those user groups that we're going to be using with this pilot, because we really want to make sure that it's not just really technical people, but a range of users are included to really understand and test, did we get this right? And was Copilot useful, valuable, beneficial to everyone? And then once we've really understood from that pilot technical launch, maybe simple things like, did people find value naturally, or did they have to consciously think about using Copilot? Did they need a little bit of help and guidance with those triggers to really get the value from it? What was the level of effort that we needed to put in to really get the value back? And once we understand all of that, we've measured that success through that regular cadence and communications with our pilot group. We then need to think about, right, how does this scale? Do we, for instance, want to give something like Copilot to everyone in the organization? Is it going to be particular teams, where we've seen more value from the testing and the piloting that we've done? And actually, that's where we start to almost justify that business case. And mentioned $30 per user per month is not exactly a small amount of money. But if we're getting huge amounts of value and productivity from it, then actually it could be the easiest investment that we make as an organization. And that's only something that you as organizations yourselves can answer. And then once we've gone through all of this and we've really understood the pilots and their success and their measures and their outcomes, we then need to think about, well, actually, within that scalability, how do we introduce this change, and how do we get, the wider community and participants and people across the organization engaging with and using Copilots? And so we need to expand out those discovery sessions to really understand people's ways of working, start to understand our user needs, probably also to understand resistance as well. Copilot being an AI tool coming in as part of our Microsoft 365 environment, there will likely be resistance to people in terms of, is it going to replace my job? Is it a threat to my job? Or is it, what the marketing and the advertising and the collateral suggests, which is it's a Copilot. So it's there to help you make your job easier and get you time back. And, part of that extension is also the stakeholders that we're engaging with. Who's going to sponsor this? Who's really interested in it? And who, as stakeholders as well, are resistant, potentially anyway, to the introduction of Copilot? Let's map them out. Let's really start to understand their needs, their wants, their frustrations, and where Copilot could be a help and a benefit to them and their teams. Now, I'm sure if you've introduced Teams or Viva Engage or anything recently, you've used a champions network as an extension of that to help make the change done well. And, no different here with Copilot. We need to make sure we have those champions on the ground as an extension of the project and the program to really make sure it is being championed. People can get help, just little tips and advice, sharing stories, maybe sharing if it didn't work as expected and what they could do differently next time. And we really need to make sure that through this coordinated change strategy and tactics that we deploy, we're getting the benefit of Copilot, because we know that without something like these change tactics, we're not going to be as successful. Now, traditionally, we might have talked about training sessions. Now we probably talk more about coaching. The way that Copilot is being brought into Word, PowerPoint, Outlook, Teams, it's not a new thing, but it's being introduced into the platforms that we are more kind of used to and manage and deal with day to day. And so therefore it's much more of a coaching approach that we need to be adopting. Yes, maybe some quick reference guides, short videos, maybe a did you know session might be useful, but actually sitting down, working with people, understanding their role, their job, that's where we then start to see more value by actually coaching them through how to get the most out of Copilot. And obviously, that pilot group that we started out with when we were testing the success and the benefits measurement, they are still needed, they're still required. We want them to be talking about what they found when they first started using it. We need to be managing that community, bringing those champions together, really making sure that we are raising awareness essentially of how Copilot can help us, what we're doing, where we say great value. And I think that really comes from that community coming together and talking about it, which leads me nicely onto campaigns and communication. If we don't raise awareness, it will just be another box, another thing that sits in the taskbar that we're not quite sure about and we don't want to click on because we might do the wrong thing. It's exactly the same with Copilot. We need to make sure that people understand when to use it, why they should be using it, how to engage with it. And that comes by, supporting people through good communication and making sure there's a coordinated, strategic campaign that sits there and talks to the benefits and how it's going to be helpful for them and make their lives easier, because that's, what people want to hear, understand, and then start to use in their new ways of working. Because let's be honest, that introduction of Copilot will be a new way of working for people. And I don't think we can expect everyone from day one necessarily to just get it and start using it. And that's where all these change tactics listed here, really start to come together and make change and the introduction of Copilot more successful. So that's a little bit of a run through from Ant and myself. I guess, are there any questions? Carly, I know that you've been keeping an eye on the Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, David. All right, so we'll start with the first one. And this person is wondering, what do you guys see as the biggest risk for Copilot to businesses? So David, if you want to start us off.
Oh, that's a really good question. I actually am probably going to slightly steal Ant's answer here, which is I think a little bit if the data isn't set up correctly from the start, if you don't have your permissions controlled in the right way, then that is that risk that someone using Copilot could accidentally stumble across something that they didn't know they had access to or maybe shouldn't have had access to, and therefore it's worth taking that 6-7 week period to get that right. I think that's probably the biggest risk from an organizational perspective. I think from a people perspective, it's them not understanding the value and the benefits and getting why they should be using it.
Anton, is there anything you'd like to add?
Oh, no, thank you, David. Answered my technical bit. I just want to say, okay, other than technically, just agree with David. So if you just enable Copilot and then it's not landing because the supporting campaign was not there, then you may see, okay, we will not see the return of investment for the tool and we will not go from pilot to the full scale rollout. And there's not going to be like a risk, but there's going to be a missing opportunity, I would say. So yeah, both technical and change perspectives.
Awesome, thank you, Ant. All right, the next question is, do we know the feature differences between Copilot with E3 and E5 licenses compared to standalone Copilot licensing?
So as far as I'm aware, there is no standalone Copilot licensing. So Copilot is a license which could be only applied on top of E3 or E5. I know maybe someone who's asking this question is leading to the Bing Enterprise Chat, for example, which will be coming to everyone who's licensed for M365. So the difference between the Bing Enterprise Chat and the Copilot is that Bing Enterprise Chat is almost containing the ChatGPT, the public version of ChatGPT within your organization. So your requests are not leaving your environment, but also it is not able to reason on top of your company data, and it's not able to create those tangible outputs where Copilot should be able to make decisions on top of the data which is sitting within the organization, and it will be able to create the Word documents and PowerPoint presentations. But yeah, in terms of license perspective, the E3 and E5 are absolute prerequisites to the Copilot. Even if you buy a Copilot license without being E3 or E5 licensed, it's not gonna work.
Great, thanks, Anton. All right, next up, you mentioned that OneDrive is required for Copilot and that there are privacy controls through the SharePoint Admin Center. Does this mean that Copilot will be able to look for content in SharePoint?
Yes, exactly. So Copilot will be able to look for content in SharePoint. That's correct. And it's not Copilot directly when you type your prompt, but that's actually a semantic index and semantic search working behind the scenes and indexing your content in SharePoint and in OneDrive. So almost in the same way as the modern search is indexing your documents today, the semantic indexing will be indexing your documents, well, I can say tomorrow, just adding this additional machine learning to search. So it will be able to build those links and the meaning of the documents. So the short answer is yes, Copilot will have access to your data in SharePoint and OneDrive. And that's why it is really important that every employee in the organization only has access to the documents that they should have access to. Just to make sure that no one, it's very easy to even test today, right? So you can ask one of your colleagues from different department, maybe from a different role, and you can ask them to go and search for the payroll for 2023 or for the business plan for 2024. And if they can search for this information today, it means that basically it's overshared because they probably shouldn't. And Copilot will be just another way of surfacing this information.
All right, thanks, Anton. So the next one is also in relation to that. What are the requirements for setting up indexing in SharePoint in order for Copilot to be utilized at its maximum capacity?
So I think in terms of indexing, the enterprise search should be enabled. When we're talking about like utilizing Copilot for its maximum capacity, I think it's very important to understand that your information architecture and the structure of the documents, the structure of the sites should reflect the real business, how it's structured today. So then it actually makes more sense from a taxonomy perspective and from those relationship perspective that this certain document is sitting in a specific site which is dedicated to specific project, I would say. In this case, the semantic index will be built in a full way, and then when you asking Copilot information about this project or information about the document, right, it can actually link the document, the project, the site, the stakeholders, and give you a comprehensive answer.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anton. One more. How quickly is Copilot likely to evolve, and will improvements be announced on M365 Message Center?
I think this is a speculative question, which probably should be answered to Microsoft, but I can hand it over to David. What do you think, David? I think we can just debate.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at something like Microsoft Viva, when that got first announced, you know, it got announced in quite an embryonic stage with some aspects, and then it's really continued to grow. You see a lot more on the published M365 roadmap, and then a lot coming out for the Message Center now as well. So I think, you know, as with anything that relates to Microsoft 365, it will be continue to be invested in, and, you know, those updates as and when they come will come through the Message Center in your M365 admin environment.
Fantastic. And actually, we do have a couple more since we have a couple minutes here. So this one, please could you advise whether the readiness data in the WM dashboard is updated in real time?
The short answer is no, because it's been indexed by the scripts behind the scenes. So neither the WM readiness dashboard or the permission analysis tool, as we call it, nor the SharePoint Advanced Management for Syntax, they are not providing the information in real time, just because of the amount of data which should be processed and scanned. So if you can imagine the multi-regional organization with tens or hundreds of thousands of people and probably millions of sites and documents, they will not be able to be kind of displayed. This information will not be able to be displayed in real time. So therefore, both syntax advanced management and this reporting that we were showing on the Power BI, it's using scripts behind the scenes to refresh this data every couple of days or every 24 hours, depending on the company size, and provide you the aggregated reporting, but it's always delayed. The only thing which is showing you information in a real time is the audit log, but the audit log is something which is like very reactive. When you have an event, like someone just shared the document or someone just created a site, it appears in the audit log, and then you should be able to act upon this information. Everything else is kind of aggregated.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anton and David. And with that, we just have a few last steps to leave everybody with to prepare for Copilot.
Okay. So basically, thanks everyone for joining. This is the QR code where you can, if you have any questions, reach out to the to WM Reply, where we can always advise on kind of what the next steps you as an organization would like to consider. And yeah, stay in touch. Subscribe to our channel at YouTube, because as I said, this is just the first event in the series we're planning on AI in a modern workplace. And thanks for joining.